Monday was the big John Cena 20th anniversary celebration that helped WWE sell an extra 4,000 tickets that they otherwise would not have sold. The last real needle mover. And it's not Roman Reigns. His name is John Cena. A lot of people, myself included, they were expecting this to be the kickoff to a Cena match at Summerslam, likely a match with Austin Theory. And the two of them did share a backstage moment together where Theory ran down Cena. He went to go take a selfie, but there was nobody there. Well, Cena was there. He just couldn't see him. But that's all that we got. Otherwise, this was one big 20th birthday party for John Cena with testimonials from different wrestlers airing throughout the show. The most notable three being from Chris Jericho, Daniel Bryan, and The Big Show. And that was as simple as WWE, and I think it was Bruce Pritchard, reaching out directly to Tony Khan for approval to have them send messages in. And Tony said, yes, it sounds like this is a nice thing that you're doing for John Cena. And he said, as long as they're okay with it, the wrestlers have to be okay with it, but if they're cool with it, then all the requests are approved. So a few weeks ago, we had AJ Styles sending in a 20th anniversary video to Impact for their Slammiversary pay-per-view, and now we get these AEW stars sending in their testimonials into Monday Night Raw. It was nice to see. Mark Henry did a video too, but for whatever reason that didn't air. Maybe he filmed his testimonial on a potato, and the video quality was not up to snuff, I don't know, but his is the only one that didn't air. Vince McMahon made yet another appearance. This was his third on television since stepping aside as CEO and chairman. We're seeing him more now than we have in years. The guy steps aside and we're seeing him more now than ever. He came out to introduce John Cena, who walked out wearing his new t-shirt, which is a play off of the original WrestleMania game for the NES, which was, I believe, the first WWF game for Nintendo, for the main system. It was the first wrestling game that I ever played, and it was the shits. I remember Bam Bam Bigelow doing cartwheels every 5 seconds. He didn't say much that we have not heard him say before. He was very humble. He thanked the fans. He said he was 45 years old. Time for his colonoscopy. No, he didn't say that. But it is time. He is at that age. He said he doesn't know when we're going to see him in the ring again. There was a one more match chant which he cut off, and he said it wouldn't be just one. That was an important line. He made it very clear when he comes back, he's not just coming back for a one-shot. He's not saying it won't happen, he just doesn't know when that's going to be. I would think July 30th in Nashville would be a pretty good guess. He said when he did return, it wouldn't be about him, it would be about us. And that was it. And the crowd loved him, but it was underwhelming that they didn't shoot some kind of an angle. You know, maybe they figured since Money in the Bank was this weekend and Theory's already got a match to promote against Bobby Lashley, you know, why do anything now? I mean, look, that didn't stop them from shooting an angle with Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns to set up the SummerSlam main event. But I am wondering if maybe he's not going to be at SummerSlam. Maybe the plan is for him to be at WrestleMania instead. We are going to have our answer by next Monday. For sure. By next Monday, we're going to know whether or not John Cena is on the show or not. That's the July 11th episode of Raw. If there is no mention of Cena by that show, then he's not going to be on the SummerSlam card. I'm convinced of this. Because if he was going to be on that card, they would want to advertise him for it, and they would want to sell as many tickets as they can. Look at all the tickets he pushed to Raw last Monday. Now they have a stadium to fill. You don't think they want to announce John Cena if he's going to be on the show? Make sure they announce him with plenty of time. You start moving more tickets. So I don't think we're going to have to wait that long for an answer. Had we not already seen Cena back on TV less than a year ago, even a simple hi and goodbye like this I think would have been fine. But it definitely felt underwhelming when it was over and nothing came of it. But the subject of John Cena as the greatest of all time has come up again since they've been calling him that on TV going back to last year. That's their new tagline for him. He is the greatest of all time. That's what WWE calls him. That's how they refer to him on TV. Vince McMahon called him that again on Monday. The greatest of all time. It is a completely subjective thing. As time has gone on, I have come to appreciate John Cena more than I did when he was still active full-time. And I think a lot of people are in the same camp. I'm far from the only one who feels like this. I didn't hate John Cena. There are people who absolutely hated John Cena, and probably still do. But if you would have asked me that question years ago, I would have laughed in your face. But as time has gone on, I have come to appreciate, maybe now because we don't get to see him very often, to appreciate what he brought to the table. Many times over the years, I have defended John Cena on my show as a worker, because I still think he gets a lot of unfair criticism for not being a good wrestler when he has actually had a ton of excellent, memorable matches in his career. His body of work speaks for itself. But when you're as over as John Cena is, I don't want to say work rate doesn't matter at all, but, you know, how many moves you can do and how good they look, that doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter as much. The fact is, the guy was and still is super over with the audience. He's larger than life. He has had greater longevity than most. And he is probably the greatest spokesperson and role model outside of the ring that this company has ever had. I mean, Titus O'Neil is up there too, but I'm talking about in terms of real top talent. There's nobody better in that respect than John Cena. I absolutely agree that John Cena is the greatest of all time when it comes to that. Especially all the Make-A-Wish stuff that he's done. I mean, there has never been a top star in WWE history who is a greater representative for the company and just as good of a human being, a great humanitarian as John Cena. Mick Foley is up there with him, but Cena is the best. I mean, he's the high watermark in this company. You know, so many of the biggest names that have worked for that company have been tainted in some way or have had their name attached to some sort of scandal. Cena is one of the few who never embarrassed WWE. They were very fortunate to have somebody like him that they could put on their posters and they can send out to do media interviews. You can see why Vince McMahon loved having him as his top guy, and he never wanted to turn him heel, even though there were opportunities to do it, and Cena himself wanted to do it at one point. And there were plans for it. But Vince got cold feet. He didn't even want to broach the subject from that point on. It would have made for better television, and it would have opened him up to new opponents, and it would have freshened the character up, but in hindsight, I can understand why they never did it. You know, where does Cena rank all time, though? He's in the conversation, but he is not the greatest of all time. He is not the greatest wrestler of all time in WWE or just in general. He's not on my Mount Rushmore. But again, it is a subjective thing. For all the good that Cena has done, there were also a lot of fans who stopped watching during the Cena era, who were turned off by him in the way that he was booked. Or maybe they held it against him because it wasn't the Attitude Era anymore, and Cena represented the antithesis of what they grew up watching and having fun with people like Stone Cold and The Rock. You know, for all the merch that he's sold, and he sold a lot of t-shirts, I'm reminded of Randy Orton many years ago responding to a fan who pointed out to him that WWE was only selling kids' t-shirts with John Cena branding on them at some of the live events. I think it might have been on a European tour. This is when Cena was outselling everybody else, and people were always saying, oh, John Cena sells more merch than everybody else. He's the biggest merch seller in the company. And Orton responded and said, you know, that's a great point. He didn't argue what this fan was saying. I mean, it's not that hard to outsell everybody else when 80% or 90% of the shirts at the merch stands belongs to one person. And the rest of them have to fight for the other 20%. Now, Cena's always been popular with the kids. I'm not saying it doesn't make sense to stock up on extra Cena shirts, but how do you think it made the other talent feel to see that and not see their own merch? How are you supposed to compete with John Cena and try to outsell him when most of the shit they're putting out for sale belongs to one person? So, I mean, there's been a lot of stories like that over the years, and that's where some of the Cena hate comes from. When they first moved him to Monday Night Raw, and they started pushing him, they were pushing him. I mean, they were pushing him hard down people's throats, whether they liked it or not. And the fans began to rebel. That was not the case when he was the Doctor of Thugonomics on SmackDown. That only started when he got drafted to Raw in 2005. And on that note, there was one tweet that bothered me. On Monday when I saw it, all the wrestlers and all the WWE employees and former employees and writers and people were posting very nice messages and thank you messages to John Cena. And that's all very nice. But there was one tweet that really got under my skin. It was from former WWE head writer. This is not just some random person. Former head writer for a decade in WWE, Bryan. He said, "Do you remember that time that our top babyface was booed mercilessly by thousands of people every night for a solid 8 years because he was, I don't know, kind of nice to children? Congrats on 20 incredible years, John Cena, the genuine article." That really aggravated the shit out of me when I read that, because he was either being completely ignorant or completely dishonest when he posted that. I mean, it is typical WWE revisionist history. Gewirtz spent over a decade working as a writer for Vince McMahon. He was in the inner circle for a long time. He was in the bubble. If that's what they honestly believe, then there is a willful ignorance there that is even worse than I thought. The majority of those fans did not boo John Cena and chant "Cena sucks" because he was nice to children. That is a stupid fucking thing to say. They booed him because when he got drafted to Raw, they changed him. It wasn't the same John Cena that we saw on SmackDown. They also probably pushed him too hard, too fast. Which goes to what I was just talking about with Austin Theory and why WWE has to be very careful if they plan on not only giving him money in the bank, but putting the championship on him very soon. It could end up blowing up in their face. There is such a thing as too much, too soon. And I think that was a big part of it also with John Cena. He wasn't very good in the ring, not as good as he would get later on. So here's the new top champion on Raw, right? He just got drafted. And if you go back and you watch his work at the time, in 2005, even the night that he got drafted, the guy had 2 left feet. He wasn't very good. He didn't have to go out there and work like Bret Hart, but it was noticeable how much of a step down from people like Shawn Michaels and Triple H and Chris Benoit that he was. There was a feeling that he didn't, deserve it. He hadn't earned the spot. And some people began to resent him for it. That's where some of the boos came from. There were others on the roster that fans liked, and Cena was beating them all. And that's always going to upset people. The idea that John Cena was burying people, and I hate to even use that word, I think the Cena burying people idea was overplayed. You ask people, who did John Cena bury? And they end up throwing out names like Umaga and Damien Sandow. Umaga was the savage heel who was there to be beaten by somebody like John Cena. It's just like Rusev many years later, the evil Bulgarian, right? In 2015 WrestleMania, Cena handed him his very first defeat. He won the U.S. title. It was always meant to end that way. The evil foreign menace beaten by the American hero. Now, Sandow, I agree they could have done more with him, but he was never going to be the world champion. Some people are just not going to be the world champion and should not be in that spot. The Nexus is a different story. Even Cena himself admits, or he admitted later on to Chris Jericho and Edge, that after that SummerSlam main event in 2010, it was a mistake to book that match and book that finish the way they did. The Super Cena booking absolutely buried the Nexus that year. And they still had a lot of mileage in them, but they never recovered from that. That was a mistake. But the point is, there are a lot of different reasons that you can point to why people booed John Cena. They booed him in 2011 against CM Punk because they liked CM Punk more. They booed him against The Rock because they liked The Rock more. And Cena had made dumb comments about him leaving for Hollywood and abandoning his WWE fans. He was only saying what Vince McMahon wanted him to say, and he got heat for it. And now he sings a very different tune, and he's apologized to The Rock for ever saying that, because now he's doing the same thing. He's making a name for himself in Hollywood. Pick whatever reason you want. There's plenty to choose from. But for Gewirtz to pretend like he has no idea why all the mean wrestling fans booed John Cena for so many years, and to say, well, I guess it was just because he was nice to little kids, That is one of the dumbest fucking things that I have heard in a very long time. Coming from someone who was probably at least partially responsible for why John Cena was booed so heavily in the first place. But when you're in the WWE bubble, it's only natural to not take responsibility for anything being your fault and just shift all the blame onto the fans. Right? Why look in the mirror when you can just blame the fans for everything? John Cena has been part of some of the best matches in WWE history. The Judgment Day I Quit match with JBL. I think that was his first truly great match. The TLC match in Toronto with Edge at Unforgiven. The Last Man Standing match at the Royal Rumble with Umaga. That 55-minute match he had on Raw in the UK with Shawn Michaels. Money in the Bank with CM Punk, one of my favorite matches of all time. That first WrestleMania match in Miami with The Rock. That did big business. The Extreme Rules match with Brock Lesnar when Brock first came back to the company. That was such a different kind of match. It was such a unique match. It was great. The Summerslam match with Daniel Bryan, one of the greatest babyface matches in company history. The Royal Rumble triple threat with Brock Lesnar and Seth Rollins, the series of matches that he had with AJ Styles. You cannot ever say that John Cena did not know how to work or that he couldn't wrestle. He could wrestle just fine. He was not the best wrestler, but he could wrestle just fine. And he's got the resume to back it up. He is the last real star that company may have ever had and may have ever produced. Cena is a wonderful ambassador for WWE. You know, in a business that has traditionally had a lot of very scummy people in it, and that has a real dark underbelly, John Cena stands out as somebody to hold up as a model for others. And he has my respect. I think time will be even kinder to him as the years go by. But is he the greatest of all time? I don't think John Cena has ever been the best at any one thing. At his peak, he was never the draw that Austin was when Austin was white hot at his peak. But Austin also had less time on top than John Cena did. Much less time. He was never the in-ring worker that a Bret Hart or a Shawn Michaels or a Randy Savage or a Ric Flair were. But he still had memorable matches. He can talk on the mic, but is he the best promo of all time? No, he's not. That's why I say, jack of all trades, master of none. I cannot rank him ahead of Hulk Hogan or Steve Austin as far as how important they were. Frankly, I can't put him past Hogan, Austin, Flair. I mean, there's a bunch of people who I would rank ahead of John Cena. But I do think he is in the conversation. And I don't know that I would have said that 5 years ago. In fact, I know I wouldn't have said that 5 years ago. I think it's also a generational thing. If you grew up on John Cena, if you're a young fan, or if you only became a fan when John Cena was on top, then John Cena is probably your number one. He's probably the one that you hold in the highest regard. People say, oh, what about Bruno? You're like, Bruno who? Hulk who? Right? So I think part of it also is a generational thing. But do I think he is the greatest of all time? No. Do I think he is in the conversation that you can make an argument for it? Yes. And I think that if you were to poll 10 people on who is on their Mount Rushmore and who they look at, and if we're just talking WWE in terms of greatest of all time, you probably would get 10 different answers. That's why it's so hard to really answer that question. But I do think he's in the conversation, and I do think time, as the years go on, will end up being even kinder to John Cena. And we're going to look back and say, man, he was really the last of the real stars that WWE ever made.